Hello. So today we're going to be looking at container queries. So what are container queries? There's two parts basically. One is very similar to a media query. So instead of saying like when the viewport is 1,000 pixels wide at least, or something like that, you can say, as you see on the screen, see these little colored areas. You could say with a query container, when this pink rectangle here or this blue square, when that's 300 pixels wide, do this. So kind of like a more specific media query, which if you've done anything with CSS, you realize that's amazing, right? It's like super helpful. And the other part is query container units. So you can say, all right, I want this font size to be 1% of this blue query container, something like that. We're going to look at both bits now, but that's the overview. That's super helpful. So for a demo, I have got this component that I've made here. Component, very loose term, but it's just basically an image and some text. It's an image of me with two handsome sumo dudes, and some text, just a caption. Now, what we want to do is we want to have this component in all the areas of the grid that I've made here. And as you can imagine, on its own, that's not really going to work. So we just go here. This is the HTML markup for the page. This is the component. So just imagine this is like a React component or a web component, and that possibly you've made it and it might be used in like a micro front end, or it might be reused by someone else, by the teams, and you want it to look good in various situations. Like you don't know what the container that it's going to be put in, what the sizes are going to be, and you want it to adapt. That's kind of the use case here, which is great. Right, so I have copied the component a bunch of times. Now let's see how it looks. Whoa, not great. So we've got the text on the side. This component itself is a flex container. Yeah, there you see. And obviously the default row, it's arranging it on the row. So that does not work for these portrait containers, does it? So if you kind of think about it, if we're going to use a media query to try and sort this out, is say, okay, when the page is like this wide, then flip it so that it's so that the flex direction is column. But that's not going to work, is it? Because I mean, you can see here we've got all these different sizes. Like, what value would you use to say that like these bottom three should suddenly be a column? It's, it just doesn't work. You need to know, like on a more granular, let's say, level, you need to know the exact container that it's in, what the size of that is, what shape it is. So how can we do it? That's the next part, now that we know. Yes, I already started writing one here. So we've got these articles are what is holding each component now. They've each got the different background color. That's what they are, and they're in the grid. So now we're going to say, all right, I want this article, I want every single article tag to be a query container. And you can do that by saying container name equals whatever here, and container type. It can be normal, inline size, or size. We'll look at that a bit more later, but let's just see what it does first. I'm going to make that size. As always with CSS, you can make things cooler, and instead of having container name and container type, there's this funky shorthand, and you can just do test size. Nice. Right. So now we have defined all these query containers. Let's have a look. Does anything happen? Sure, it doesn't. Well, not on the DOM at least, but the visible DOM, let's say. But in the browser, in the Chrome debugging tools here, we can see there's a little, they call it a pill, right? It says container. So we know that these are containers now. But yeah, obviously nothing is visibly changed on the site itself because we haven't done anything with the query container. We've just defined one. So what will we do? We want the flex direction of these image components to change, don't we? Because it's the default now. It's the default row. We want it to be column. So we've got the class image component here. And we've got the div, which is the text there. So let's use query container. First thing, container. You know, imagine it's media. Then we actually do the name of the query container. And then we do our condition. Now in this case, we can be kind of lazy and just say orientation portrait, I guess. So if the orientation of the container is portrait, if the width is kind of a higher value than the height, we will apply the CSS in here. So that should be image component, and then we will do flex direction is column. So how nice is this? It's just each kind of container is saying, is my width bigger than my height? If so, let's do row alignment. If not, let's do column alignment. And yeah, that's really sweet. It just means we can drop the drop this little kind of component we've made in anywhere into any shape, any shaped container, and it will decide the best way to show itself. And yeah, I think that's super cool. And obviously you can see there's, you know, little bits that aren't perfect. Maybe the text here should disappear, or this should fill the whole cell, the whole container in certain situations. But you can have as many container queries as you want. We could just do another one saying if this is, you know, max width 150, if this one, then hide the text, something like that. But hopefully you see the general power, which is awesome. So yeah, look at all clicking in. It's lovely, isn't it? All right, so now we've had a little look at how exciting container queries can be and useful. Let's have a look at the next bit, which is the container query units. They are also very cool. Right, so the text, it's all too small, right? I haven't set a font size, I think. I could do, let's say 40px. As you can see, a little bit of a problem in that it's kind of nicely sized for some containers, and for other ones it's maybe a little bit big. It would be nice if we could do something more relative, right? Relative to the size of the container. And we have something like that already, don't we? We've got a viewport width or height or something like that. That again, that's pretty good, isn't it? That is good. But at least for some situations, like this one, the container query units are even better. So what we've got is things like C container, Q query, W width, 3 container query width. And now you can see, so it's like based on 1 container query width is 1%. So 3, you know, 3%. Clearly these are too small, but you can see that it's actually taking the width of the container rather than the whole viewport. Because these are all relative units and stuff, there's also, this is container query width. We've got container query inline, which is exactly the same as the width, right? We've also got container query height, and we have, what is it? Container query, let me see, I've got it on my phone. Block, of course it's block. Right, we've got container query block. Now, as you can see, these are all a bit funny. So what is really cool is we've got container query max. So let's go 3. Now that, to me, I mean, maybe this one's a bit small, but this is pretty cool. And what this one does is it takes the biggest value out of the inline and the block, or the width and the height values, and applies that. And you also have the opposite, where it takes the minimum, like so. Maybe if we put that up, and there, that's pretty funky, I think. So you know, there's loads of different situations you could use these, maybe some even more appropriate than this rubbishy example, but you can see the power, right? The amount of different options you've got now for this kind of relative sizing. So that's awesome. Cool, so that's the units and the query containers themselves. Next, I think we'll talk a little bit about the types of container and what they really are. Okay, so for this last bit, we're going to have a little look at what the different container types do, what they mean. So I've set up a little separate example. We have 3 options here: normal, inline size, or size. Normal basically does nothing. It means that any queries won't work. You could still apply styles in a container query if you wanted to, but basically just there's no reason to use it. Inline size, it will allow you to use the width. So it basically sets a width size container. What does that mean? It means that you can't use the height. So you know, back here, this is the HTML for the previous example with the grid. This is orientation portrait, right? If I changed our container query to inline size, and then we go back and have a look at that example, boom, nothing works anymore. And that's because obviously to work out portrait, you'd need to know the width and the height. Sorry, to work out the orientation as being portrait, you'd need to know the width and the height. But if you've got inline size set, then you can't do so, because you could only do something like max width. So you might be wondering, if inline size only lets you use the width, the inline, and size type lets you use the height and the width, why not just always use size? Yeah, valid point. The thing is that this doesn't just set up container queries, it's also changing stuff behind the scenes. So if you've ever seen the contain property on CSS, things like contain, size, paint, layout, things like that. This has it's the same effect. Your container type, you're basically setting contain size, and the problem with that is it basically takes away the ability of the element that you've assigned to be a container. The children of that element no longer give the container a size. Even if I'd said that clearer, it's still confusing. So let's have a little look at the example. We'll go to this one. I've just done a really simple one, and I can explain it a little bit better with a visual aid. So we've got a block element here, this div, and it's got a child div. Class actually doesn't do anything. It's something that I had before. Let's put that back actually. Sorry, what we're going to do here is we're going to make the child div a bit bigger. So say 200px. Boop. We'll have a look here. Now you can see that this div is 200px. How about the parent? This is also 200 pixels high. Now, why is that amazing? That is because this container here, this div, is taking the height of its child. You know, it's 200px because its child's 200px. Now, if this wasn't a container, that's exactly the same way it would act. And if it's an inline size container, that's also fine. And that is because it is only an inline size container. So it's only ignoring the width of its child elements. But if I change it to size, then it ignores the width and the height of its child elements. So we do that. This is still 200px, right? This is 0. It's 0 high. Yeah, because it's not getting a size from its child elements anymore. So you would have to specifically set the height on your container here. If it was just inline size, like we had before, the thing is, it does then ignore the width of this element, but what's the kind of default width of a block element? Just the whole page, right? The whole viewport. So it keeps that. It's still, you know, 11198 there, if that makes sense. So basically, when you're using container queries, if you use inline size, your layout's probably not going to change. It should be fine. If you use size, you're probably going to have more issues, and you will need to explicitly set the height on something. It didn't happen on this example. We didn't have any problems, and that's because we already have a grid. Like, we're already saying somewhere, there you go, we've got the rows here, we're already assigning a height to the container. We're saying, like, okay, this is going to be this big, so this was okay. But generally, if you should try to use inline size unless you need the height, is the main takeaway. Hope that made sense. Cool, so that was a look at container queries. I think they're really good. I think they're released maybe like a couple years ago, but now they're like supported in all the major browsers, and I think I used them at work the other day, which was what inspired the video. So yeah, go nuts. And yeah, I just think they're really nice. It's nice, especially when you're working as a programmer, you know, something comes out like this and you're like, this is actually the amount of times that you've had this kind of issues on a project, and you have to just do silly workarounds and things like that, and then something comes out that completely fixes everything, and you're like, man, this is just made my life a lot easier. Anyway, probably sounding too excited now. I'm not that excited about container queries. Thank you for joining very much. Take it easy. Bye bye.